Good morning, everyone. I'm testing the microphone, but I also will convene the meeting in about 5 minutes. We're just going to give some people some time to come so that we can get close to having a quorum so that this is a productive meeting. Thanks. No, I don't see a quorum, but we will go to board task force reports and then circle back if we don't have it. Oh, they have a little block here for it. Thank you for your patience. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I think it's about 10:10. Welcome to the July 20th meeting of the Atlanta Planning Advisory Board. I'm Debbie Skupczynski and president of APAB for 2019. Those that are sitting at the front table include Jim Martin to my far left, who is our parliamentarian and chair of the Zoning and Community Development and Human Services Committee for APAB. Melissa Moore, who will be taking minutes today. Eunice Glover, who is our second vice president. Ann Phillips, our finance secretary vice president. And at the far right is Leah LaRue, who is the assistant director for neighborhood planning. As you all know, APAB is an official city board and a representative body of the 25 NPUs, with each NPU having a single vote. Each NPU chair must formally notify Department of City Planning and APAB of their official delegate and alternate. And only these delegates or alternates may vote or speak except under certain circumstances. If you've been selected or elected a delegate and your name is not on the sign-in sheet, it means that your NPU chair did not make that notification. If you believe that there is an error, please contact the assistant director, Leah LaRue, or Daniel Vasquez, or myself, and we'll try and get that cleared up so that you can become a voting member. The meeting today is a business meeting. This is a little different than from our other meetings. There are no presentations, only resolutions, committee reports, and board rep reports. So that we can keep to our 2-hour time limit, I'll be recognizing only delegates and alternates to speak throughout the meeting. Let me say that again. Only delegates and alternates will be allowed to speak during the meeting so that there's an opportunity for everyone to speak. I'm going to ask that you only speak once on a topic unless you're asked for clarification or a question on your previous remarks. So please, no hogging the microphone today. Time has been set aside for others to speak during public comment at the end of the agenda. Please keep all questions germane to the topic being addressed and respectful of everyone in the room. I'll be watching the time and may need to cut off discussions. I'm not trying to be rude, so that we can get through our entire agenda, including public comment, before Channel 26 cuts us off promptly at noon. If you wish to speak and you're a delegate or alternate, please come to the podium and identify yourself by name and your NPU, and if you are a delegate or alternate. Comments made from the floor will not be picked up by Channel 26, so we want to make sure that every comment's broadcast. And then 2 reminders: no food or beverages in the committee room, and also no campaigning in City Hall. If you're a candidate, we're glad that you're here. We encourage you to stay, but if you want to introduce yourself as a candidate or discuss your views, you'll need to do so outside the building. We may be getting close to a quorum, so I'm going to ask the secretary if she will take the roll, and we'll see how close we are.
Hi, everybody. Okay. NPU A, Brinkley Dickerson. NPU B, Richard Raw. Dr. John Muzzy. Actually, for time's sake, if I hear somebody on your primary delegate, I will just continue on to the next NPU. If I don't hear you, then I'll move on to the alternate. Sound good? Okay. NPU C, Zach Gober. NPU D, Jim Martin. Here. NPU E, Jamie Gentry. Sean Green. NPU F, Debbie Skupczynski.
Here.
NPU G, Ola Reynolds. Sonia Hodges. NPU H, Barbara Hubbard. NPU I, Eunice Glover. Here. NPU J, Benjamin Dickerson. Kiona Jones-Green. NPU K, Lita Harmon. Junelle Thomas. NPU L, Courtney Waring. Thank you. NPU M, Rashid Muhammad. Rebecca Rice. NPU N, Amy Stout. NPU O, Carl Holt. Marcus Owens. NPU P, Rasheen Hunter. Hope Hoffman. MPU Q, Eric Toomer. David Getachew-Smith. MPU R, Ansonita Robinson. Donovan Dodds. MPU S, Chris Brown. Danielle Burrows, sorry. T, Terry Ross. V, Columbus Ward Jr. Stephanie Flowers. W, Philippe Palarin. Jack Grundler. MPU X, Michael Hopkins. Reuben Burney. Y, Chris McCord. Gloria Hawkins. Z, Ann Phillips.
We are too short from a quorum.
11.
Okay. What we will do then is move to board and task force reports. The first one up, I know we have a representative here from the Atlanta Citizen Review Board. Mr. Hardy, did you want to give a report?
Good morning. Very briefly, I'm Jim Hardy. I represent NPUs A through F on the Atlanta Citizen Review Board. Citizen Review Board is a board of a wide variety of different individuals from different backgrounds. We look at complaints against Atlanta City police officers and corrections officers. We have our own investigative staff who investigate these complaints fully, and then the board recommends action to the chief of police. She may or may not take that action. We also do mediation services. If the complainant and the police officer are in agreement to go through mediation, and we do that to try to improve communication and transparency between the police and citizens. We also engage in community outreach. Most recently, we had representation at the Atlanta Jazz Festival, and we talked to a large number of people there over the couple of days that the fest was going on. The only negative that I've seen in the period of time I've been there is that on the cases that we sustain, in other words, we find that the officer did commit some problem action, then on the sustained cases, the city police department's only taken action, or at least something like the action that we recommend in 17% of the cases. That's pretty low. So we're working with senior officials at the police department to try to figure out what the problem is and try to get it corrected. Be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Are there any questions for Jim Hardy? Any questions from the delegates or alternates?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Jim, thanks for being here. Ms. Hubbard, do you have a Keep Atlanta Beautiful? No report. Is there anyone else that is here that represents APAB on a city board or task force that would like to report? Jim, anything from Beltline TADEC?
No, we will be meeting this coming Tuesday.
Okay, thank you. This summertime is a very slow time for the city. Okay. Committee reports. The CDHS and Zoning and Land Use Committee. Mr. Martin?
Yes, we met on the 8th of July. President for Richard Rao and myself. We discussed and approved a resolution, which I have here in draft form. I didn't put it out on the front table, but I'm happy to distribute copies. Expect to bring it as an FYI here next month, or at least when we get a few of the other resolutions off our agenda, which is sort of packed full right now. The resolution is concerning standing requirements for appeals of administrative decisions before the BZA. And that we discussed several other matters, but that was the only business that we dealt with at those meetings. Our next meeting will be on the 12th of August, which is the second Monday, as is our habit, at 7 p.m., Chin Chin Restaurant, 1715 Howell Mill Road in the Kroger Plaza. That's all I have.
Great. Thank you. Any questions on that committee report? And if you miss the time and location, it's on the third page of your agenda. Committee on Council.
Hey, good morning. Terry Ross, MPUT. Committee on Council did meet at 9 a.m. this morning and shortly thereafter, between 9 and 10. And we had a couple of things, on the agenda. Number one, Ann Phillips, Finance Committee. Do we know what the status of the parking reimbursement fees, what that initiative, what's the status of that initiative?
To my knowledge, we've not received any information from our NPU coordinator's office about that. And we will have to revisit that issue and see now, since everything has changed as far as directorship is concerned, we'll probably have to revisit that issue and meet with them and, present it now to the commissioner's office for a decision to be made.
Okay, very good. And then for zoning and CDHS, Jim Martin, we had the conversation this morning about Airbnbs, pad splits, shared living spaces, and that kind of thing, which we really determined is more in the purview of zoning and land use. And I guess our question is, how can Committee on Council help the city, help zoning to help the city to get up to speed on this matter that's affecting just about every neighborhood in Atlanta?
We've discussed this at zoning and land use a couple times, and I think perhaps a bit hindered by low attendance. But there are sort of two issues there, and one of them, which is really the big one, is a broader lack of zoning enforcement. So that there are, in fact, with most of these places, a host of ongoing zoning violations, and there is absolutely no action to correct them. So that is not just with regard to rooming houses and pad split, but with regard to a lot of other issues in the city as well.
Sure.
So we've discussed some sort of a resolution on zoning enforcement more generally, and then in terms of sort of narrowing the definition of rooming houses to something that is more easily recognizable, so that enforcement is easier in those particular cases. And then sort of finally the question of, if these things are in some sense desirable, then they need to be regulated. And what we have is very few zoning categories that permit rooming houses and very little regulation of rooming houses. And so if we're going to have things like we did with the zoning ordinance update, where we created this new zoning category, which was MRMM or MRMU, I forget, they changed the definition a few times, where we're trying to get denser uses into single-family residential areas, then we need to have a host of regulations so that those denser uses are well-maintained and are safe and are not creating parking problems and are not creating trash problems, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is perhaps an opportunity there for a whole different zoning category.
Okay.
And that sort of goes beyond our expertise as a committee, but is something that we might want to sort of call for in a broader sense.
Sure. And one of the other things that came up in the conversation, Jim, was the fact that they are to be businesses that should be licensed as well, and so that's
hence the regulation. Yes.
Yes. So
but again, if your use is intrinsically illegal, then seeking a business license to perpetrate an illegal use is like saying, I'd like a license to sell crack cocaine out of my house.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen.
Right.
So you have to first create the structure. In terms of a zoning category that would permit. And I mean, I'm familiar with this because the neighborhood that I live in has had student housing in it for a long time. Okay. So, a lot of other neighborhoods in the city are kind of seeing this for the first time in the last 5 and 10 years. In my neighborhood, we've had it for 40 years. Okay. So this is an ongoing problem for a long, long time. And the solutions that planning was putting forward at NPUI's special called meeting last month? Yeah. I mean, that's something that we've had in place for 20 years, but there's no enforcement.
No enforcement.
So,
yeah.
I mean, having something on the books is great, but if they choose not to enforce it, so what?
Okay. Well, and again, the main question was how can the Committee on Council help your committee to help the city?
Well, you're welcome to come to our committee meetings to discuss.
Okay.
I think that's sort of the short answer.
Okay. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. And then attendance tracking. Attendance at the NPUs. Leah, yes. Yes, we would like to know, one, if your department is now tracking attendance at the individual NPUs, and if so, can we have that data?
Absolutely.
So yes, you are tracking attendance?
Yes, we have begun tracking NPU attendance, I believe, effective January, or going back to January. We just started. I have an intern working on that project.
Okay.
We just started that somewhere around June, but we did pull all of the attendance sheets as far back as January 1, I believe.
Okay.
And we do have a tracking system that my wonderful interns created, and I'd be happy to share that data with you all one time or monthly or however you appreciate having it.
So do we contact you or someone else in your department?
Me.
Okay. Okay, very good. Okay. And then finally, we were informed that CCI is doing some, in their NPU initiative, they're also doing some work with Atlanta Public Schools and have coordinated with Atlanta Public Schools, the social studies coordinator, to inform students to get the NPU on the curriculum of APS schools, which makes sense if you're doing government studies, then those students, as being residents of the city of Atlanta, they should be informed about the NPU system. And that concludes the report for the Committee on Council. Our next meeting is third Saturday in August, 9 a.m., right here in this room.
Did you want to ask about the playbooks?
Oh, yes, I did. Thank you. Thank you. Where are we at on getting the playbooks to the individual MPUs?
So I did receive a reminder email from the chair yesterday, and I will acknowledge that I had delegated that task to someone else, and since then it definitely slipped my mind. I apologize. I thought that it was being done, and it was not. So as of yesterday, I did reach out. We don't have enough in supply. The Department of City Planning doesn't have enough in supply.
Okay.
As far as I know, we looked into that yesterday. We have some. We don't have enough to do 20 to each MPU, so we're going to do a reprint.
Okay.
And that could take some time. I don't know how much, but my guess is that it would be reasonable to expect those to be in the hands of each MPU chair or their appointee no later than the end of September.
Okay. And actually, I know where some more are, both
I would
here
love
in
to
City
hear
Hall
that.
and at Atlanta Housing Authority. They have cases on them, so.
Oh, that's very helpful. In that
Yeah.
case, we could get them in the hands of the MPU chairs or their appointees no later than the end of August.
Okay, and
If we have enough, we can certainly have them circulated by the end of August.
Okay, and so who would I contact to offer that assistance? You? Okay.
Me.
All right. Well, then you and I will be talking.
And while you're there, I also wanted to add that today is the first time I'm hearing the question about the parking reimbursement.
Okay.
And apparently that conversation was taking
Been going on
place
for
before.
over 2 years
so I'll
now.
definitely
Yeah.
look into that as well.
Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, because what we established was increasing the MPU budget to reimburse delegates and alternates for their parking when they come down here on
It makes absolute
Saturday.
sense to me. I'll certainly advocate for that. Obviously, it's not my decision to make, but
All
I
right.
can certainly advocate for that because it makes
Yay.
sense.
Yay. Okay, great.
And
All right.
if you're not familiar with it, in prior discussions, it was also discussed that it's a broader question of travel reimbursement, so that if we're going to consider reimbursing parking, we need to consider reimbursing MARTA. Because we don't want to encourage people to take automobiles
I don't
when there's
disagree
an
with
alternative.
that, and as a representative of the Department of City Planning, we certainly encourage people to take public transportation whenever possible, or walk, or bike, or scooter, or however you can get here and keep your car off the road. We encourage that, and I will advocate for that as well.
I will bring Leah up to date on our previous discussions and give her copies of those minutes so that she'll know what we had discussed in the past.
Okay.
And then we'll sit down and discuss what we can do.
Sounds good. Okay. All right, and that's it for Committee on Council.
I have a question, actually.
Yes.
When you were discussing the public school curriculum, I recall hearing a while back on NPR that a lot of public schools had done away with civics in their core curriculum. And I don't know, are you sure that it is in the core curriculum of Atlanta Public Schools?
I'm going to leave
Kyle knows?
that to
Okay.
Mr. Kessler here.
Kyle Kessler, NPUM, representing the Center for Civic Innovation. We did have a meeting yesterday with Janine Lewis, who is the APS Social Studies Coordinator for middle school and high school. In ninth grade, there is a civics class, a government class. So we do not yet have a copy of what that curriculum is, but there is a class. Yeah.
Great, thank you for the
If I may,
clarification.
also the Department of City Planning is working with that same person, Janine Lewis, to Janine last year designed an 8th grade curriculum for social studies to incorporate the Atlanta City design. And we do have that curriculum in, I believe, all but one of the APS middle schools.
Is that something that we would want to bring to APAB as information, as a presentation at some point? Are we at that point?
If you'd like to, I'd be happy to coordinate that.
I think that would be of interest to most people.
Absolutely.
Happy to help with that.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, Mr. Rao.
Richard Rao, NPUB, delegate.
You're on.
That's the way you want me to do this.
Yes. And you're a delegate.
So I wanted to pick up on Jim's question to you, sort of, in the interest of sustaining his discussion argument about zoning enforcement. And if I could just take a second here. Enforcement versus planning is sort of a dichotomy between theory and practice, or theory and implementation, or planning and implementation. Since the general umbrella that we're under tends to be planning, and since a lot of the discussion and a lot of the activity that take place in the NPU system has to do with prospective activities in the planning realm, adherence to the planning, to the zoning ordinance and whatnot. And the reason I'm saying this to you, Terry, is because as Committee on Council, you're the venue for pursuing a kind of analysis of how zoning enforcement is actually happening in the neighborhoods and in the city, as opposed to, in theory, what we imagine the city could be like ideally if we followed the zoning ordinance and processed applications for investors and builders and whatnot. It seems that nobody, certainly the chairman of our CDH, our committee, and others, don't seem to really know what the agenda for zoning enforcement is. In other words, what their priorities are. We know, in theory, what zoning enforcement would be in the ideal sense, but it's clear if you look around town and if you ask anybody in any neighborhood that zoning enforcement does not seem to be happening, and there's a lot of practical reasons for that. For example, a lot of violations are invisible, or they happen in the evening hours when activities are taking place in buildings that aren't allowed, nor by the zoning ordinance, or the parking requirements are being violated, that sort of thing. And the Jim's committee has been discussing this, and the bottom line is, at least for certain people, including Jim, for example, if we're going to have this elaborate discussion about the zoning ordinance and about resolutions about zoning issues, affordable housing, and all that stuff, if the thing sort of falls off the cliff once it's all said and done and the bureaucratic process is done and the planning department has had its say with these activities and has managed this process through the legislative side of things, then it gets handed off to somebody else. And the question is that a priority, for APAB? Is it a priority citywide? Is it a priority for the neighborhoods? And if it is your committee interested in trying to find out more and informing the body about the matter of zoning enforcement? We kind of, sort of, have a feeling for what's called zoning enforcement, but which is really a building standards, property maintenance kind of activity. It's called zoning enforcement, but that's not really true. It's called, what is it called? It's called code enforcement. Sorry, code enforcement. But it isn't really code enforcement either, because code enforcement is a big, elaborate building code thing. They're mostly interested in maintaining a property. So aside from that, but we do know that there's a lot of interest in that. The neighborhoods are interested in that. It's a priority. It's something that's visible because you can drive by and see whether the grass is cut or there's an old
Richard,
rusting car there. So
get the point?
My point is that your committee, if it's going to support CDHR committee, actually is the main venue for looking into this issue. And is that something that you're interested in doing?
Yes. The short answer is yes. We are interested. It is a priority, and because it's impacting every neighborhood in the city of Atlanta, it is definitely a priority and something that we want to follow up on. And so that was my question to you, Jim. How can we help you to help the city to get caught up on this? So.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to suspend the committee reports at this point. I know a number of people have come into the room, and I do believe we have a quorum. Let's just make sure that we've got you on the record. So do you want to go through the NPUs that did not report someone was present earlier and just check to see if they're here? I don't think they count anyway. We'll have and you can go through the whole list if you want.
Okay, I'm only going to go through the NPUs that did not report in the last roll call. And again, I'll only call out the primary delegate unless I do not hear them, and then I'll go to the secondary delegate. NPU A, Brinkley Dickerson. NPU Z, Zach Gober. NPU E, Jamie Gentry. Sean Green. NPU J, Benjamin Dickerson. Kiona Jones-Green. NPU K, Lita Harmon. Junelle Thomas. Thank you. NPU M, Rashid Muhammad. Rebecca Rice. O, Carl Holt. Marcus Owens. P, Rasheen Hunter. Thank you. Q, Eric Toomer. David Getachew Smith. S, Chris Brown. Danielle Burrows. V, Columbus Ward Jr. Thank you. And Y, Chris McCord. Gloria Hawkins.
W. Jack was here a moment ago, too. W.
Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped W. Jack, we saw you. Thank you. That would be 15, Madam President. We have quorum.
We have a quorum.
Oh, did I miss somebody?
Yes.
It's because I'd circled your name when you came in, and I had already checked you. I apologize, sir.
So we have
16.
16.
It's a banner day.
Okay. I'm going to go back to the top of the agenda and start with the receiving of the minutes.
Motion to adopt the agenda?
We can adopt the agenda, although we're halfway through it. already. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda? Great. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor of adopting the agenda, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? The agenda is adopted. The minutes for the June meeting are on the front of on the front ledge. Are there any corrections to the June minutes? If not, may I have a motion to adopt those minutes, to put them in the record?
Motion to adopt the minutes?
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Great. Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor of adopting the minutes, please say aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. We're going to move to resolutions. And one more, as Ms. Hawkins from NPUY. We know that you're here. Thank you. We wanted to make sure we're keeping track of those. Thank you for being here. Okay. There are 4 resolutions that have been on our agenda for several months, and I want to make sure that we consider and make a final recommendation on all 4 of those. The first is Resolution 19003, and if you don't have a copy of them, they are on the front ledge. This is a resolution requesting the City of Atlanta Planning Department to provide NPUs with boilerplate language for zoning conditions requiring that affordable units be included in new residential developments. Mr. Martin, do you want to explain the resolution?
Okay. I think the title puts it fairly succinctly. The intention here is that because we have zoning regulations on the books already, and specifically the inclusionary zoning, that require certain percentages of housing units to be set aside as affordable housing, that this is a tool that we can use in rezonings as a condition on rezoning applications in order to create more affordable housing units at what would amount to zero cost to the public, because we are essentially granting value to a developer in rezoning a property, and in return for that value, some public good should be created. And if the development itself does not represent sufficient public good to justify the rezoning, then creating some affordable housing units might very well fill that gap. And so we are asking planning to provide us with language for those conditions in the form of a boilerplate, because we don't have specific percentages in mind, but rather the idea that a percentage should be set aside for those conditions. And that pretty much summarizes.
Are there any questions on the resolution or any comments on the resolution? We've been distributing this.
Yeah,
Yes.
this has been around for 4 months, I believe. So we've been through the discussion on this a few times already.
Did you want to make a comment? You have to come to the podium, identify yourself and your NPU, please. And please speak into the microphone.
Yes, ma'am. Gloria Hawkins. I guess my only question is, assuming that none of that language exists elsewhere, it seems like foundation of everything the city has been doing regarding affordable housing would set out the criterion, the requirements pursuant to at least the ordinance that requires 15% of those housing within that half mile of the Beltline has to be designated for affordable housing. It just seems like that language would exist somewhere.
I believe that it does. I think what we're really asking them to do is simply lift the language out of the inclusionary zoning ordinance and give it back to us. But I have gotten pushback on that from planners, so if they'd like different language, that's fine too, but we need to know what that is.
And you want to see it in the form of a resolution? Is that what I mean? Is that what I'm understanding?
The resolution is asking for the language. The language can be provided in the form of a memorandum or a letter or anything else, but it has to come from planning so that we don't end up in a situation where an MPU places a condition on a zoning and planning then says it's an invalid condition because of the language. And we've had that in the past with other zoning conditions.
Because you feel currently it doesn't exist. Is that what I'm hearing?
I am not aware of, excuse me, I am not aware of any condition that has been placed on a rezoning application requiring affordable housing within this city, and I have inquired about it. So if it's happened, they're keeping it quiet. Leah, do you want to comment on that in any way? Do you know of any such condition that's ever been placed on a rezoning application?
I cannot comment on that at this time.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. And that is out of committee, so it does not require a second.
Are there any other comments or questions regarding the resolution? Seeing none, we'll ask the secretary to take the vote. Well, let's record this one since for all the resolutions. Or a voice vote. Oh. I'd like to have the number of NPUs that are supporting this resolution on the record. Well, we don't know who. There, in some cases, we have multiple people from the same NPU. So
People who aren't supposed to vote should know that. Okay.
okay, the secretary will call the roll.
When I call your MPU, please have a single yay or nay. MPU B. MPU D.
Oh, yay, sorry.
MPU F.
Yay.
MPU G. MPU H. MPU I. MPU K. MPU L. MPU N. MPU P. MPU R. MPU T. MPU V. W. X. Y. Z. I'm sorry, could you repeat yourself?
Yeah.
Did I miss any NPUs?
That was a yay.
That was a yay. That's why. Could NPU B repeat your vote?
B.
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 Mr. Rao, could you repeat your vote?
Yes. Okay.
The yeas have it.
Yay and nay is a bit hard because they sound so much alike.
Yeah, they do. Okay.
So
So
the Robert Rules of Order too.
I know.
Okay.
So
That would be
count 'em up. I almost never do this.
15 yeas, 1 nay, 1 abstention, for a total of 17 votes.
The motion to send this resolution to Planning and City Council for the record has passed. The second is Resolution 19004. This is a resolution requiring the City of Atlanta Planning Department to provide the NPUs with boilerplate language for zoning conditions regarding specific trees or groups of trees be protected during redevelopment. This also comes from the Zoning and CDHS Committee. Mr. Martin.
Excuse me, I think we have a question.
Point of parliamentary procedure. If the intent is to get a vote from each MPU, just one, to kind of help, we can call for division of the assembly, and then one person from each MPU can stand and then vote that way.
Yeah, I know, but that's not the method that I wanted to use for that case, but thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, should I explain or do we have a question first?
Amy Stout, NPUN. It says redevelopment of a site. Does that mean residential, commercial, previously undeveloped site, a previously developed site? I was just curious if there was any kind of specification to site.
I don't recall there being any. Remind me what line we're on here. Sorry, I'm looking for the word
calls
site.
for preservation of specific
in the
trees
title.
during the redevelopment of a site.
Okay.
And what about if it's not redeveloped, it's a previously undeveloped site? That seems like that would be even more important to preserve trees there.
I guess the language that I'm looking at ends with the word redevelopment, not of a site. I don't know. Sorry.
So that could be.
There are copies. There are copies of the one that has been that we're voting on now on the front table, and I know it's been kicking around for a while. So, I mean, you may have made that comment at a previous meeting, and we may have made a revision in response to that comment already. Yes. Do you have the copy from the front table? Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. So, what line are we on? Please help me. The last line. Okay. Sorry. I was looking at the title. Okay. I'm with you now. Yes. Sorry. No, there was nothing in particular with regard to a site, although the condition is obviously in regard to a rezoning. So that, I mean, if there is already a right vested with the zoning, you can't very well go in and put a condition on it. Is that, I guess, somewhat of an answer to your question, or? I mean, if you come seeking a rezoning of, say, an R4A lot for a C1 development, then it is plausible that that rezoning would be a C1C with the condition requiring certain trees or areas of trees to be saved. If you already have a C1...
So you consider redevelopment to be equal to rezoning? Because I don't see the word rezoning in the title.
Well, you see the word zoning conditions.
Well, there's zoning conditions for all kinds of things. They don't have to be rezoned. Conditions of any kind of...
I mean, I guess it is conceivable that these zoning conditions could be attached proactively. I find it hard to believe that they would be, because I'm imagining something that's much more site-specific. But... And again, in the absence of a redevelopment, I don't see trees being destroyed.
Could it be, would it apply, or could it apply to a variance application?
Exactly.
Where there
or even redevelopment, I mean, just a development for the first time. That's when you're going to have the most trees, and you're not going to include that in this.
Oh, okay.
Wouldn't you want to protect the trees then?
Development versus redevelopment,
Sure.
I guess, is, I mean, you could certainly strike the re at the beginning of the word development, because a redevelopment is also a development. And a development need not be a redevelopment on a lot that had been forested. But correct, but again, it is a zoning question. We have a tree ordinance in place already in the city that conditions how you can develop a site with regard to what trees are to be protected and what trees may be destroyed, and this does not address that in any way. So this is separate from and beyond that. And the issue here is one where if a developer comes seeking rezoning and there is a tree or an area of trees that can be and should be saved on that site, and if the MPU wishes to place a condition that those trees be saved, staff will argue against the validity of that condition right now. We've done it. In my MPU, we've said, we approved this on the condition that those trees be saved. It's gone to the ZRB, and staff has said that's an invalid condition. It should be stricken from the rezoning. It has been stricken from the zoning, and the trees in question were clear-cut. So, in this case, we needed appropriate language. We didn't have appropriate language, obviously, because the condition was called invalid by staff. So that's the specific circumstance that something like this is intended to address. Does that?
But it sounds like language isn't going to save you if they don't have a rule to.
Well, I mean, we need language that staff will not argue against the validity of. Okay. So we need staff to tell us what language they will not argue against the validity of. Do we need to identify trees on the site plan? We can certainly site plan specific zone of development, and that site plan shows trees. So we site plan specifically zone of development. The site plan shows trees. The trees get cut because our specifics didn't pertain to the trees that were shown on the site plan, apparently. That's an example, right? So how do we attach that condition that protects those trees? And I don't know how, but we need something that's valid, not something that's simply going to be struck down later, or we're wasting our time. Jack.
Jack Rundler, MPUW. So first of all, I apologize for not thinking about this earlier, because I know this has been bouncing around for a long time. But this discussion made me think, what if there isn't any language? Like, what if the city would need to pass a new ordinance for there to be able to be valid language? Should we consider adding that as another clause to this resolution?
Well, I think if there were some sound reason for saying you can't do that, that would be a response to our request, right? Here is a law, a section of the Constitution, or whatever it is that says that this cannot be done.
Okay.
But simply saying, "Whoop, that can't be done," is where we're at now, and that's not a sufficient answer. So I don't think you want to invite that answer.
Okay.
I mean, you could certainly accept that answer if it were provided, but not if it were simply off the cuff. Oh, well, that's impossible, because, that would be the answer to all our inquiries otherwise.
So in other words, it procedurally makes more sense to do a sort of a two-part thing if necessary.
Yeah, I would say so. I don't know of any reason why it would be impossible.
Okay, cool.
Although I can't say for sure that doesn't exist.
Richard Rao, NPUB again. So I'm wondering whether, I think Amy's point about the last sentence is probably a good one. I'm wondering whether this thing becomes a little, if the purpose is the neighborhood or the NPU values certain trees, certain clusters of trees that exist, and this opportunity only comes at the occasion of an application for something. And maybe it should simply say, in accord with any application pertaining to land use. As in other words, a step back from the specific of a zoning. A newly assigned zoning seems to be very narrow. If an applicant comes before the NPU with any issue that has to do with alteration to land use, I think that's when you want to trigger this. Is that a fair thing to say?
Well, we're asking for a zoning condition, and you can certainly attach a zoning condition to a zoning variance.
That would be one.
So
that would be one occasion where you might do this.
Now,
but there might be other occasions.
Yeah, you might also have, say, a CDP change for land use, but those, I'm not aware of those ever occurring in the absence of a rezoning or an intention for a rezoning.
So you prefer to have it narrowly defined to just a zoning case, and you don't necessarily say a zoning application. You say newly assigned zoning. That kind of puts handcuffs on you, doesn't it? In a way.
I think it was intended to be the opposite. To address the question of a rezoning as opposed to a zoning variance, both of which would be picked up in this. And I would sort of add to that I think there are a lot of opportunities for tree save in a lot of different circumstances, and this is intended to address one and only one of those circumstances. And I think we could certainly draft other resolutions to address other circumstances, and specifically if there are trees or groups of trees that we want to act proactively about, where there is already a zoning in place that would permit their destruction, perhaps there's some opportunity there as well. I think that would be much more of a constitutional issue, because when the zoning is already in place, there are vested development rights. And so, Georgia being a property rights sort of state, I could very well say I have the right to cut those trees down if I want to. But again, that's sort of a separate issue, and this is not intended to address that one way or the other. Any other questions?
Are there any? Do we need an amendment to the resolution to change that redevelopment to development?
I would certainly think that changing the word redevelopment to development would suit the intentions of this, and I would be happy to make that editorial change in response to Amy's comment.
Ms. Thomas?
Dronell Thomas, NPUK. We can change a lot of words to mean a lot of things, and a lot of it falls to interpretation and ethics.
Thank you.
Agreed. I think that, as is often the case, enforcement is an issue, and we've seen this before with developers who've agreed to save trees and cut them down anyway, agreed to save structures and destroyed them anyway. So, yeah, I mean, if someone is dedicated to the idea of violating their zoning, it's awfully hard to stop them before the fact. And if you don't stop someone from killing a tree before the fact, you haven't saved the tree.
Let me check with the parliamentarian. Oh, Jim, do we need an amendment to change redevelopment to development?
Technically, I would say that we would, but although it is not officially part of Robert's rules, the notion of friendly amendment is expedient. And so what I would say is if there are no objections to changing redevelopment to development.
Are there any objections to changing that?
That we could simply consider amended.
It's amended.
Yes,
yeah.
Thanks. Gloria Hawkins-Wynn, NPUI. Mr. Martin, currently the system is one of recompense, that the developer can come in, is that correct, and remove whatever trees are necessary in that development, but yet pay a fee. Is that correct? That's the way it currently is?
It's a little more complex than that, so that there are trees that are protected because they are, say, outside of the buildable area on a site. And other than that, the destruction of trees, you have to pay recompense for or replace. So it's a recompense or replacement thing.
Recently, within this past month, someone presented to Lakewood Heights, and what was presented was that the movement now with legislation, which the belief is to come before the NPU shortly, maybe the next 6 months, is that development, the intent of the legislation is that now the city will look at what trees are there, and development has to be commensurate with saving the trees that are there, regardless of whether it's outside of the buildable area based on trees. But now, again, it seems to be a very specific movement, and it looks like it may be concurrent with what you're proposing here. And again, what I heard and understood was that the movement is now for the developer to come in and build in conjunction with what is currently there, rather than I'll pay you to remove this tree to put what I want. Is that correct?
Okay, so the city has been in the process of revising the tree ordinance for at least 15 years, and over that time there has not been a significant revision to the tree ordinance. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of good ideas floating around out there, and whether any of them actually become law in my lifetime, I don't know. So, again, a revision to the tree ordinance is not at odds with this, because this is working through zoning rather than working through the tree ordinance, although certainly a revision to the tree ordinance is long overdue.
So it's not saying the same thing, essentially. That's what I thought.
No, it's not saying the same thing, right? So that essentially there are all sorts of processes involved, but a zoning condition is just that, right? It says, you got to do this, and not doing it is a zoning violation. Whereas the penalties and the provisions in the tree ordinance are something different, right? So you can cut down a tree illegally and not commit a zoning violation, and you can commit a zoning violation and not cut down a tree. But in this case, if there were a zoning condition protecting that tree, then you would be doing both if you were to destroy that tree.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? There's a motion on the floor to adopt Resolution 19004, amended to replace redevelopment to development. Let's do a hand vote first. One representative from each NPU. All those in favor of this resolution, please raise your hand. Seventeen in favor. Anyone opposed to this amendment or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion carries unanimously 17-0. Next resolution is 19006. This is a resolution requesting the City of Atlanta, the Atlanta Development Authority, and the Development Authority of Fulton County not to provide tax abatements or grants to developers proposing to create affordable rental housing unless the value of those grants and abatements is less than the discounted present value of the aggregate of rental discounts that will make the newly created housing affordable. This also comes from the APAB Zoning and CDHS Committee. Mr. Martin.
Okay. It's sort of a mouthful, but I believe that says it all. Essentially, what has been happening in the city is that tax abatements are given away to developers to build what are then called affordable housing units, and what affordability constitutes in that context is a discount on rent over market rate. And the issue from my perspective is that discount over market rate has a real cash value, and that tax abatement has a real cash value, and the real cash value of that tax abatement is public money, and the real cash value of that rental discount is savings for the tenant who would otherwise be housing cost burdened. And since a clear alternative to that scheme would simply be to hand that money over to that individual, that any affordable housing that is created in that format should not cost more than simply handing the money over to the individual who's housing cost burdened. Otherwise, we're wasting public money on inefficiency and pretending that it has something to do with the free market, which it obviously doesn't. That's it, sort of in a nutshell. I knew you'd have a question, Jack. Oh.
So Jack Rundler, MPUW, this isn't a question, this is just a statement. You understated it a little bit. It's not that it's inefficient, it's that it is a backdoor subsidy for the developer and is therefore corrupt.
Yeah, I mean, you could phrase it a lot of different ways. I guess the real question is, are we using public money for public good, or are we using public money to enrich people who are already rich?
Yeah. Yes.
So I have a question. Amy Stout, NPUN. I live in DeKalb County. Is there an equally corrupt DeKalb County Development Authority that should be called out in this as well?
Well, you live in DeKalb County, but you live in the city of Atlanta. So certainly the city of Atlanta's development authority, in addition to the Fulton County Development Authority, is doing this. So I don't know. Yes. So whether there exists a third independent development authority that we should be calling out by name in this, I do not know. Yep. I don't know the answer to your question.
Good question to research, though. Any other questions or comments regarding this resolution?
Hi, Terry Ross, MPUT. One question. The mayor of Atlanta has declared $1 billion towards affordable housing. Do we know who, what, where in terms of that initiative? Who is overseeing that? Who has oversight and that kind of thing? Do we have that answer?
I don't believe that the $1 billion has been identified in any tangible way, where it will come from and where it will go. If it has, I'm not aware of it. If anybody knows any more about it than I do, by all means, speak up.
Almost more MPUB, but they have a new housing commission, which is Chair Lee, supposed to be overall in charge of the housing program for the city.
Thank you. Any other comments from the delegates or alternates? The zoning committee or the CDHS committee from APAB is bringing forth this resolution. No second is required. If there's no more discussion, then I'm going to call for a vote, and we'll do this hand vote first. Jack, did you have a final comment that you wanted to make?
Sorry, I just looked it up, and it turns out that there is something called the Development Authority of DeKalb County, so maybe we could just add that.
Yeah, I'm happy to add that. Are you confident that they engaged in similar activities?
No.
Okay.
I have to
it's within their authority to? Okay. Enough said. So then I would suggest, if there are no objections, that a friendly amendment would be to include the Development Authority of DeKalb County.
Are there any objections to adding DeKalb County?
Well, I mean, the county may be known for corruption, but I'm not familiar with the activities of the Development Authority itself.
Okay, so without objection, we will add that
Third.
It's fourth. City of Atlanta Development Authority in Fulton County.
Okay, yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. All right. Motion on the floor to approve this resolution. We'll do this by hand vote. All those in favor, one vote for NPU, please raise your hand. $16 in favor. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? One. And is anyone abstaining? The motion carries by a vote of 16-1. Thank you. And we have one final resolution. And after that, we'll do the happy dance to get these off the agenda. This is Resolution 19007, the resolution requesting the City of Atlanta Planning Department to create a template for communicating NPU recommendations to city boards and to direct planning staff in formulating recommendations to reach out to NPU leadership prior to communicating a recommendation to a city board that contradicts an NPU recommendation. And I believe this also comes from the CDHS Committee of APAB. Mr. Martin.
Yes, there we go. Basically, the issue here is one of properly communicating between the NPU and the city, and it sort of has two parts to it. One is that I've heard complaints from members of city boards that the NPU has failed to communicate anything other than what its decision was on a matter before them, yay or nay. And, in fact, there was, in the case of my NPU and probably in the case of all NPUs, an entire rationale underlying the decision that we reached. But there is no official format through which that is to be communicated to the board. I can certainly take it on myself to reach out and type an email to the secretary of the board and assume that that will then be distributed to all of the board members. But what exactly they need to see from me is not spelled out and should be. And then the other part to that is that quite often the NPU will make a recommendation that is then contradicted by city staff. And in contradicting the NPU's recommendation, the city staff member who's formulating that decision makes no effort to learn what the rationale underlying the NPU's decision is. So here again, that happens even before the board meets. And in that case, since the staff member is formulating their decision always after the NPU has formulated its decision, it should be the responsibility of a city staff member, before making a recommendation that contradicts the NPU's recommendation, excuse me, to reach out to the NPU to find out what that rationale was. I mean, that doesn't mean they can't still contradict it, but at least learn the relevant facts before making a recommendation. In my NPU, we had a case where the NPU made a certain recommendation, staff made a contradictory recommendation, and the staff recommendation was based on things that were factually incorrect. The board then decided to defer the case because what they had before them was an NPU recommendation that they claimed came with insufficient documentation and a staff recommendation that was clearly predicated on false information. It wasted a lot of time, wasted a lot of effort, no reason for it to be that way. Questions?
Terry Ross, MPUT. With Leah sitting right here, calling for this template, Leah, does planning have the capacity to meet this request? Yes. I'm asking Leah.
If you don't mind, Mr. Ross, would you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by capacity?
Well,
And I don't mean to split hairs. I just want to, because I have a team of 5 with 2 staff members on it, myself and Daniel. So but if you mean capacity in terms of human resources, the answer is absolutely resounding no. If you meant something else, then I'd like to know specifically.
well, the way I'm interpreting this is that we're asking planning to act as the middleman between the various boards and the NPU recommendations, either with follow-up with the boards or with confirmation at the NPU.
From what I understand, Mr. Martin, to have been explaining is that you all are requesting for our department to create a template, not necessarily to drive the process, but to simply create the template, assuming then that the NPUs would facilitate that communication between the NPU and the board. Is that correct, or are you asking?
I think what we're looking for is something like a one-page document.
Correct.
To be distributed, and then also a criteria for the contents of that one-page document to be communicated, so that if that one-page document were to say, this document is to be communicated to the planner who is the secretary for the BZA or the ZRB by such and so many days before the scheduled meeting on this matter, right? Or communicated by certified mail, or but whatever the mode of communication is should be specified along with the relevant information. So the NPU's recommendation, the rationale for it, the relevant sections of city code, that sort of thing should be called out for in the template, and then how it is to be communicated should be called out for in the template, and when it is to be communicated should be called out for in the template.
I think the mechanics of this would probably have to be worked out with a combination of representatives from the NPUs and planning.
But that it is something that we all agree to, so the board doesn't say, after the fact, well, we weren't provided with sufficient information as is called for somewhere, because sufficient information isn't called for anywhere.
Well, and I understand the need for it, but I'm just asking, can planning make it happen?
So to answer your question, now that I believe I understand what you meant by capacity. Yes, we do have the capacity to carry that out. God help me. It will take a little bit of work, but I don't see any reason that we couldn't get that done, because we are a small team of mighty means and miracle workers. That is what we do.
Yeah, and I would also think that it would depend on the type of application that we're reporting on. Of rezoning applications that is something that's being considered citywide might need to look a little bit different than a variance application that is appropriate to just a single NPU versus special events, which we sort of have a communication document already. And
honestly, it would be significantly more work for the NPUs than it would be for us. We already report back the means of the vote to the various boards. The outcome of the vote to the various boards, and we would be doing nothing more. By we, I mean the NPU team, the Department of City Planning. We'd be doing nothing more than attaching another document to that outcome, that voting outcome. So it's really not much work for us. It does sound like a little more work for the NPUs.
And for the planner reviewing the application. So, assuming that planner would then, if a planner would then choose to contradict an NPU recommendation, they would be required to make a phone call.
Well,
it doesn't seem onerous to me, but
yeah.
Staff recommendation.
If there's there's a staff recommendation to the board that is made by a planner on staff. Right? Those are the people making the recommendations, and so if a planner on staff chooses to make a recommendation that is contrary to the NPU's recommendation, then that planner should make some effort to reach out to the NPU.
Well, I'd like to comment on that, because you're not going to get that, I feel. It's anonymous who the staff planner was that's assigned. I've never been able to find out who wrote a staff recommendation.
Really?
And they don't release it to the day of. So they're certainly not going to call you before the NPU and tell you we're coming up with a different recommendation.
It's not anonymous. I've
sure
found,
it is. How do you know who the planner is that wrote it?
I've called planning and asked, and
I've
told
never
me.
been able to get that.
It's not like posted anywhere that I'm aware of, but they certainly don't.
And they tell you before the board
meeting? They don't
meeting?
keep the information secret.
They tell you before the board meeting?
Yes.
They tell you before the ZRB?
Yes.
Well, how do you get that information? Because I've called and they say we release it the morning of, and that's all.
You can't get the staff report.
Yeah, the staff report. That's
but
what
you
I'm
can
talking
find
about.
out who the staff member writing the report is well ahead of time.
So what good does that do if you don't know what their recommendation is?
The staff member who is assigned to write the report. Well, the staff member doesn't sort of dream up the report 10 seconds before putting on a paper.
I know, but they don't release it.
Right. But if they do release it, okay, so...
you're asking them to change their policy significantly.
So I don't know ahead of a meeting that a staff member is going to contradict me. But the staff member knows ahead of the meeting that they are going to contradict me, right? And knowing that, they have an obligation to find out why I took a different opinion of this than they have. Well, I mean, they don't have to agree with me, but they have to at least learn what it was, right? That's not a huge burden to do your research, right? And as I said in the example that I used before, which is a real case that happened in my MPU, I mean, they just didn't bother to find out what the facts of the case were. Made stuff up. And it was factually incorrect. Jack.
So 3 quick things. One, I'm not sure what the connection is between reading what the MPU provides versus contacting the MPU chair, unless the planner himself finds the document insufficient and wants to ask questions. They shouldn't be required to call just because they're making a contradictory decision if they feel that the information provided was sufficient. Second, I'm glad to hear that the Department of Planning does have the capacity to do this, but I wanted to point out that in general, I don't think APAB should necessarily be overly concerned about whether a department of the city or any other organization has the capacity to fulfill the thing we're asking for, because that's not a argument saying that the thing that we're asking for is unreasonable so much as it is an argument that maybe the city council needs to adjust the funding. So if we ask for something that requires additional resources to happen, then, if it's still a thing worth doing, then the solution is to add more resources, not to throw up our hands and say, oh, we're not even going to ask because we think it's too onerous.
Thank you. After Ms. Thomas.
Jornell Thomas, I hope that we don't keep rebutting everything and look at what it is that we can do and make happen. First, as a member of a board, and I won't say which one, that the city has many boards that perform different capacities. And I must confess that I have not read in detail this resolution creating a template. Some boards have some templates that come to the board that we look at and we read the information related to that. Now, for zoning, I don't know. And then how you do that, I don't know. But it's a lot of work for NPU chairs to pull together everything that you're asking in the way that you're demanding. And I think what we want to do is to make reasonable laws and have administrative positions that can be done in the most efficient manner. And I'm not sure that this resolution is going to lead to that.
Thank you.
Okay. I would say a couple things about that. One is that I don't think we're demanding any more work of MPU chairs, in that it is always the option of the MPU to communicate nothing more than a yay or a nay. The question is, if you wish to communicate more than a yay or a nay, you need to have a format with which to do it. And so in the case of the License Review Board, as far as I know, all you've ever received from my MPU is a yay or a nay, and then whatever the investigator says and whatever the planner says. But I have never, well, I shouldn't say never, I've almost never communicated directly with the board, and when I have, it's been at your meetings by showing up and speaking to the board. I haven't sent any written communications that I can recall to the License Review Board in the 13 years that I've been chair of an MPU. I don't know if other MPUs do or not. Oh, yeah, by all means.
No, not a rebuttal, just a response. Some NPUs do attach additional information. Some NPUs attach certain conditions which may or may not be enforceable, but they do, and those are considered many times. Most of the time.
That's good to know. Thank you.
All right. One of the things I wanted to share is that CCI has informed us that there's really no need to reinvent the wheel here. As part of their research in the NPU initiative, they have studied other cities and how they handle this process, and so that is something that they can assist APAB with as well.
I would hope that in calling for planning staff to provide us with this, that planning staff would avail themselves of whatever research CCI has done and whatever information CCI has in formulating this document.
Absolutely.
Although it doesn't, the resolution obviously doesn't call out CCI specifically. But,
right. But CCI has offered to help on it, and I'm only...
Sounds like a great idea to me.
Me too. So I'm only trying to envision the way I think the NPU initiative should have been from the beginning, collaboration with APAB.
Right.
I think the NPU initiative is sort of is running concurrently with us doing our business, and right. there's a certain amount of overlap there, and there's no reason why there can't be synergies.
Mm-hmm. Right, I agree.
Right. Thank you. I just wanted to add, while Ms. Hawkins is coming, that I think every NPU chair operates a little differently and has developed relationships with the planning department, where in my NPU, when I've got an application that has false information, I pick up the phone or I send an email and say, look, this is the wrong story to do it. I've had planners call me when they see our votes and discuss our vote and explain why we can't add a condition, for example. But it takes a lot of time and effort to develop those relationships. And especially when the staff is changing, to define those people, to know who to contact. So you gotta work the crowd to find the best resources, or at least someone that can get you to the right resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. And I believe the operative word here is communication. Let me give you an example of, and I'm not so sure I understand all of the whereas, but communication is extremely important. Let me give you an example of what's happened in NPU. Why? When the communities, which is composed roughly of 11 communities, when the communities vote, oftentimes the way it's been translated in the vote at the NPU is that the neighborhood was, say, voted not in favor of the zoning matter or the variance. But when the vote is taken at the NPU, there may be 17 yays, but the yays are in favor of what the community decided. But when they're reported to the city, the 17 yays versus the 2 nays are reported as the NPU being in favor of the variance or the zoning. That has happened such that right now, 156 Lakewood Way, which the community was vehemently opposed to the spot zoning, looks like a resolution passed by the city council, by our city council person for that zoning to be MRC3 to MRC4, I believe. However, by the time we saw the error, we were being told it was too late. It was just our position is strictly a recommendation. So again, the word I use here is communication. So what happens at the NPU level when the vote is taken in favor of the community, it's reported as yays in favor of the legislation or the variance or the zoning. So again, I think this speaks, but I think what it primarily speaks to is a supportive rationale, such that if the rationale conflicts with what the vote is, it's clear then that further questions need to be asked. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of an underlying parliamentary procedure question there as well, which is that if I make a motion to deny something, then a vote in favor of my motion is a vote against the thing that I've just made a motion to deny, and that quite often can get lost in translation. But But again, if there's a direct mode of communication between the chair of the MPU, who presumably knows what the sentiment was, and the secretary, I presume the secretary of the affected board, that hopefully will take a couple links out of that chain of communication and reduce the opportunity for miscommunication.
You don't recognize that the miscommunication is occurred until there's rationale when the staff member now is reviewing the MPU's report or communication. Why I'm in support of this is because I think, not trying to add more work or layers to anyone, that this is an example whereby if the staff person saw the rationale coming from the MPU, it would quickly create an alert that that's not, the rationale says the community voted against it and the MPU is a favor of the community's vote versus being in favor of the legislation. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this resolution? Seeing none, this comes from the CDHS committee, is that correct? So there's no second that's required. We will take another hand count. No, I'm sorry, another voice vote. All hand count. Sorry. I'm only good for an hour and a half every morning. All those in favor, please, of this resolution, please raise your hand. One vote per NPU, delegates and alternates only. Thank you. 14 in favor. Those opposed? 2 opposed. Any abstentions? The motion carries by a vote of 14 to 2. And this is one resolution that I think we're going to have to work together on in order to implement. Thank you. You may all do the little happy dance. You will not see these ever on the agenda again. We are now going to go back to committee reports. We just have a couple left. Is there anyone here from the Transportation Committee? Al is not here. Finance, Ian, do you have a finance report? No report. Thank you. I do have an executive committee report. A number of things that I wanted to mention. First, on your agenda, on page 2 of the agenda, you'll notice that there is a public notice for legislation that's being considered by the City Council. It's called right-of-way dining legislation. It will be on your agendas if you haven't seen it already for July and August. Please pay attention to this particular piece of legislation. It is not a typical zoning part, Chapter 16 or an alcohol license legislation, so the NPUs are only need to be apprised of it, but it does have an impact on our neighborhoods, and particularly those with small businesses that have outdoor seating in the right-of-way. I'm thinking of little cafe tables and chairs that they've already put out for people to eat or drink outside their front door, but it is on the sidewalk. This legislation is going to require a $250 application fee in order to provide eating and drinking outside on the sidewalk, and there is also an annual permit fee that starts at $500 up to $1,000 annually. So for a small business, that could be a pretty big hit. So please let your small businesses know that this is on the table. And I'm going to ask Leah if she knows the time frame for the public comment.
I do not have that in front of me, but I can look it up and see if I can access it.
Yeah, I tried looking for it as well. I would suggest that if you have any comments or concerns, to send it to the originator of the legislation, which is Council Member Faroki, or to your own council members as well.
Debbie, I have a question about that. In general, they say that fees are intended to recover costs associated with these things. And in permitting outdoor dining, it's kind of hard to imagine a $500 cost incurred by the city in letting somebody put tables and chairs in the sidewalk.
You know, if you, on your electronic copy of the public notice, if you click on the legislation itself, it'll take you to the website, and there is an analysis of the costs, a fairly detailed analysis of the costs and comparisons of other cities that have similar programs. So you can take a look at that and see if it makes any reasonable sense. The next thing I wanted to mention is that last month Leah distributed a letter informing us that NPUs were prohibited from requiring alcohol license applicants and special events applicants from attending more than one meeting. Because of the number of applications that some NPUs have to manage each month, many of us took exception with that policy, noting that we rely on our neighborhoods or a committee structure to do the evaluation and make recommendations to the NPUs. I promised at that time to convene a working committee to review these processes. Summertime is not the time to do that. It's hard to get a group of people together for anything. So once school starts back, you'll see a notice for getting a group together and putting together a strategy for how we want to tackle that issue. Next, the Executive Committee met on July 7th to discuss today's agenda. That's our primary purpose. We also had an informal brainstorming session on ways to get quality input from most, if not all, NPUs on APAB resolutions, and we talked about some alternate voting methods. So I want to use some time just to get a quick straw vote on a couple things that we talked about to see if there would be any interest or any strong opposition to some additional methods. Now, before we do this, I want to note we haven't talked about the mechanics of how this would get done, so don't even ask. It's just in concept of whether or not you think it would work or it would have any value. So, for example, I'd like to get a hand count, one representative for each MPU, if you would be in favor of doing email voting on things like these resolutions. An email would be sent to the NPU to vote. Anyone would be in favor of that? Two people? You're thinking about it? Three people? Okay. Okay. Well, there's lots of alternatives. We could do one or all, but whatever we do, it'd have to require a bylaw change. So that's the reason why I'm thinking, just asking. Taking a conference call vote. Anyone in favor of doing a conference call vote? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands, I see. 6, 7 hands for that. Anyone would be in favor of putting APAB resolutions on NPU agendas like any other application and asking for a report back of the vote with concerns, questions, comments, etc.? Oh, okay. I like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And I'm 13. Okay. That would take some coordination with the Department of Planning, but that may... thank you for that. And then in terms of the quality of APAB meetings, the Executive Committee's been looking at ways to make our meetings more valuable and effective and worthwhile coming, because we need to get our butts to these meetings at an early time on Saturdays. Any thoughts about alternating monthly meetings between business meetings, like the kind that we're having today, versus an informational meeting like we had last month, where there would be presentations or work sessions on a topic, so that we come together to talk about citywide issues, get briefed on different issues. So let me ask you, first of all, how would you all feel about alternating the content of these APAB meetings? Are those in favor of that? I see 1, 2, 3 hands. Okay. 5, 6. Okay, we're thinking about it. 5 or 6 in favor. Okay. Yeah. please come to the podium so we can pick up your comments, okay? Well, okay, so here's the issue, and a lot of this is my fault. I will take responsibility for it. We had 3 very good presentations last month, but it sucked up our 2 hours, yes, which meant that we couldn't have a business meeting. Today, I purposefully didn't have any presentations to absolutely ensure that we could get these resolutions off the agenda, because we've been carrying them 3 months. So if we could alternate it, we can put focus and have good discussion like we did today on the resolutions versus having to, work within a very a difficult time frame. And our time frame is limited by the bylaws as well as Channel 26. So that's one of the reasons why I'm thinking about it. I also wanted to make sure that we're allowing time for public comment, because it sits on the agenda and for MPU announcements, that we always seem to run out of time. So I'm trying to figure out ways that make this more meaningful. Yes, ma'am.
So I think there's value in both the presentation types and the business. And ideally, I would like to see the presentations more controlled. That some of that stuff was interesting last month, but we didn't need to hear the history of MARTA. And so if you could give presenters, you're going to have 10 minutes, and that's what you're going to have. You're not going to have half an hour to just go on. That would have maybe helped.
Okay, thank you for that feedback.
So I like the idea of devoting as much time to things as needs to be done, although I agree with the statement about controlling the length of presentations. My concern is that sometimes it's possible for resolutions to be relatively urgent, and I don't want to open the opportunity for someone to argue that, we can't do this because this isn't the month for business stuff. So yeah, for that reason, I would say that my suggestion would actually be just to maybe flip the order and try to do business stuff first. And I recognize that that's a challenge because of people showing up late, like I did today. I'm sorry about that, and not having a quorum. But that's the real problem we need to fix, I think.
Well, and thank you for both of those comments. And that takes me to my last straw vote, and that would be changing the meeting hours. We seem to be able to get in a quorum, but not until 11:30 at the earliest, sometimes 10:30, sometimes a little bit later than that, and sometimes not at all. So I'm throwing that out there. Anyone in favor of changing the hours to moving it to 10:30, making it, nope, 10 o'clock? So does that mean that you'll all be here at 10 o'clock next time? Okay.
Yeah. So,
pardon? No. I have a hard enough time getting here by 9:30. No, I wasn't. We checked in at 9:16, but thank you. Okay. 10 o'clock it is. No change to the bylaws. Okay. Any other comments on this?
I would sort of like to reiterate Jack's second comment, which is that if we have business ahead of presentations, it's always been the way that we operate to skip over things that require a quorum when we don't have a quorum,
right,
but that we could then revert to the order of the day when we do have a quorum. Whereas if we have presentations ahead of business, then we must work our way through the presentations regardless of whether or not we have a quorum, which can be a huge time sink.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd like to recommend, Madam Chair, that we limit presentations. I really think we should not have any more than one, maybe two, at any one meeting to give us time to do all of our business. There are going to be some presentations that, even though we might say 10 minutes, they're going to be important enough that we're going to have a number of questions, and you're not going to be able to stick to time. So if you limit the number of presentations, then I think we may kind of stay on track a little bit.
And sometimes the presentations are timely. So, I don't know. And last month, I won't call any names, but she threw a ringer into the mess, which took a little bit of time. An important one at that, though. Yes, sir.
So one other thought is, considering that presentations are important, but they're sort of fundamentally different than the business of APAB. And I think it almost would be worth exploring the possibility of spinning them off into an entirely separate meeting, maybe one that occurs after the APAB meeting or before the APAB meeting or some other defined time, and working with the city to adjust the Channel 26 coverage so that there can be the APAB meeting from 10 to noon, and then there can be public presentations that get televised from like noon to 2 or something like that, and just as a totally separate thing. And we can still have delegates show up and ask questions if they want, but that's not necessarily part of APAB, or it doesn't have to be.
That's an interesting thought. Thank you. Ms. Thomas? Pull that down. Okay.
Madam Chair, the problem with getting people on time is an age-old problem that goes way back when. But we also have to look at the delegates and the same people that are engaged in other activities throughout the city for the same thing. So you usually see many of the same people over and over and over, and they feel overextended. The question is, how can we not overextend persons that are voluntarily extending themselves? That's a concern that we always have to be that we always have to deal with. But those persons who've committed to be delegates, I was in a quandary today, thinking about whether or not am I going to go and waste my time. And I'm sure that other people won't get up here and say the same thing, but many of them have many of the same issues. So how can we make the time meaningful for not only those of us that come, but those people that tell me that they're watching us on TV debate about a lot of nonsense that they're not interested in hearing. So that's a problem for the executive committee and for us to strike that balance of presentations, many of which we as delegates will react to and respond to as a part of the business of this organization. So we need to continue to try to find ways to do that.
Thank you for your comments. I totally agree. And I'm also one that wonders about whether or not this will be a use of good time. That is the end of my executive committee report. Just want to remind you that there are 2 upcoming meetings. The APAB executive committee meeting is August 4th. That'll be at De Palma's Porch from 4 to 6 p.m. on a Sunday. And the next APAB general meeting is August 17th from noon to 12, right here, same place, same time. NPU announcements. Are there any NPUs that want to make an announcement? Nobody? Oh. I lost my page.
On the 7th of August, 6 p.m. at the Gathering Spot, NPU's J, K, L, and T will be combining for an AMI workshop, just understanding AMI and how it's formulated, and the boundaries and restrictions of it. I'm sorry, average median income. Or area median income. See, I need to get to the workshop. Yeah.
And if someone wants to attend, do they need to pre-register, or do they just show up?
It is at the Gathering Spot, and yes, they do need to pre-register, and I can send you the link for the RSVP, Debbie.
What time?
At 6 p.m. on the 7th of August. Okay.
I'm sorry, Terry, is there a limit to the number of people that can attend?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
I'll have to find
didn't
out.
want to do mass distribution and then you'd be flooded with people that are outside of those NPUs that you don't have room for the folks that this is intended for.
I'll follow up and find out
Okay.
before I give you the information, but you'll have it by Monday.
Okay, great. Thank you.
This is kind of not an announcement from an NPU, but it occurred to me to ask this question about the President's Executive Committee report. With a forum here of 17 people, I think it's a good time to ask the question of the President. Mr. Toomer's not here today, and there's been conversations in the Executive Committee about him pursuing the bylaw revisions and whatnot. And one of the major topics that, we feel like we should put at his feet to look at, as I understand, is quorum, how you calculate quorum, whether quorum that the current system we're currently using is appropriate, given the fact that the attendance is what it usually is. Sometimes we're one person short. Often we're one person short. NPUs D, C, and A don't come at all. Should they be included? And there's a lot of issues there that are worth discussing. And could you just explain to these folks, where you are in terms of assigning that task to Eric?
Eric is working on a bylaw amendment. I think you might recall several months ago we did a hand count of if there was a preference to go as, I think we were talking about 9 people or 10 people as a threshold. He is working on that. To your point, we're also looking at alternatives to getting NPU input, which may or may not require a physical presence at this meeting. So looking for other ways to accomplish that. But that's taken some thinking. Yes.
Madam Chair, we might need to look at the city code that governs APAB to make sure that those resolutions and changes that we're proposing are made in congruent with what is required by APAB. I mean, not APAB, by the city code.
Yeah, I've been watching that very closely. Thank you for reminding us. Any public comment or any other NPU? I just want to make sure that there's public comment.
Yes, ma'am. Announcement. Everyone knows what August 6th is, correct? It is National Night Out. And it is an opportunity for the communities and APD to fellowship, to create a spirit of community oneness, and we're all in this together. To that end, I'm in NPUY, which makes up, we're in the Southeast Quadrant X, Y, and Z. Lakewood Heights is going to be the sponsor for this year's that quadrant's National Night Out. My number is 678-698-6803. We're looking for vendors' participation. We're looking for a showing that impresses Zone 3, that we're in numbers, we support them, and we're looking to build. We're looking for their support. Again, that's August 6th. Generally, the hours are between 5 and 8. We are looking, and there's going to be more posted, because typically in times past, school was in session. Participation was very low because school was in session. This year, school doesn't start until the 12th. Last year, there was a thunderstorm. So we're looking to show up so that APD Zone 3 respects the fact that there's strength in numbers and we can hold each other accountable, and we're going to have fun. We're going to have bouncies for the children. We're going to eat, and we're going to get to know all of our neighbors in that Southeast Quadrant. GHWIN, W-I-N-N, at Comcast.net. Anybody that wants to lend, either bringing potluck or in any manner. We're going to have music, and we're going to rely on Mr. Kessler and his group to come in and maybe give a briefing. So there you are. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for the announcement. Public comment. The public speaks.
My name is Mr. Public from NPUU. I've got a couple of comments. Number one is I talked to Jim Schneider recently, and he sounds he's doing a lot better. He's in a rehab facility in Arizona. Number two is, if y'all don't like the debate nonsense, then bring up an issue that does have importance to you. Your neighbor may not say something that is important, but I bet you do. Number three is, if one is going to be a delegate or an alternate to this organization, at least have the responsibility to show up. And if you don't show up, get out and get somebody that will have the responsibility to show up and participate. Another item is, I would love to see a sign, maybe right in front of the press, that has maybe a phone number, maybe an email or a web address, so that people that are watching this program can access it and find out about these acronyms called NPUs or AMIs or APABs, whatever those things are. And I would like to see the acronyms start off at every meeting, explain them more than once during the meeting, because I have no idea who's watching this television program, but I would assume that there are newbies every time. Also, I would suggest that instead of running it in live, real time, have some repeats here. There's 168 hours in the week. Yeah, I'll put it up on YouTube. Thank you, Jack. And I've got about 15, 16 more, but...
No.
What do you mean, oh?
You might have noticed the agenda said 3 minutes.
I'm up to about a minute and a half now.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Carr.
Good morning, Asile, resident of NPUL, representing the Center for Civic Innovation. I wanted to give everyone here an update on the NPU initiative. We'll be having our next working session next Saturday on July 27th from noon to 2. During this time, we'll be bringing in one of our partners with Georgia Tech, who will be helping us get feedback on some survey materials that we're working on to deploy in the fall. So that'll be right around the corner from here on 115 MLK, and I encourage everyone to attend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jack Rundler, MPUW. I just wanted to note that today happens to be the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. So yay, science.
Yay. Some of us were around to see it.
Vernell Thomas, NPUK. One of the things that I just wanted us to think about is the aging process. And I'm serving on the Atlanta Commission on Aging, but as I look around this room, there are just very few millennials in here. And a part of everything that we do, we need to make sure that we think about aging, ageism, our communities, and what it will mean to the next generation.
Thank you.
I am forced to tag on to Mr. Techie Jack Grundler's comment. I have heard recently is that this country has spent approximately $500 million to send people to the moon, and we can't even get housing and adequate food for people. How can this be?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
The time is now 12 noon. I make a motion that we adjourn.
Second. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. Thank you all for making the effort, for being here, and for your fabulous comments today and your participation.
Madam Chair, I have a couple of announcements, and I did not mind having the meeting adjourned before those announcements.
Okay.
Because they're not necessary for the record.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Just by reminder, the grant program normally rolls out in October, and as we announced last month, it'll be rolling out in January of 2020 because we are making changes to the program. Also, in the current grant application, applicants are required to attend 3 APAB meetings, and that has not been strictly enforced moving forward. applicants will be required to attend 6 meetings, and it will be strictly enforced. We will not accept applications from MPUs that are not represented at least 6 APAB meetings in the previous year. Calendar year, yes, ma'am. Also, as a reminder to all of the chairs or those representing your MPUs, bylaws are due September 30th, so your bylaws committees should be working on them. My phone number is incorrect on the APAB agenda. It's actually 404-546-0159. 546-0159. Those of you who have not received your city design books, if you are an alternate or a delegate or an MPU chair, please see me. I'd be happy to get it for you. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.